The last two. Paul Sullivan says the Second Amendment obviously only applies to a well-regulated militia. Can't you read? I can read, Paul. The definition of a militia is a group of people that bring their own weapons. Can you read? So the question is regulation, really. And first of all, you can't read. So the first argument I'll make about the militia argument about the Second Amendment is a militia, the definition is not kind of a club. The definition of a militia is citizens that bring their own weapons. If they're issued weapons, it's not a militia. That's an army. So the definition of a militia is citizens that have their own weapons at home. That's the definition of a militia. So obviously the founders intended individual citizens to have their own weapons at home. Secondly, if you read the sentence, you can see that the sentence has a declarative clause and a sort of an ornamental clause, if you like. There are actual terms for this. I don't remember what they are. But basically, it doesn't say, the Second Amendment doesn't say, in order for the people to bear arms, they must be members of a well-regulated militia. That would be a clear declarative statement. That's not what it says. It says a well-regulated militia, being, I forget what the exact wording is, being essential to the right of the people to bear arms shall not be infringed. In other words, what it's saying is the militia is a nice byproduct of people having weapons. But it doesn't say you have to be a member of a militia to have the weapons, because if that's what they wanted to say, that's what they would have said. They would have said, in order for private citizens to have their own weapons, they must be members of a well-regulated militia. It doesn't say that at all. It says a well-regulated militia is one of the benefits of people bearing arms. It doesn't say that they have to be a member of it. It says well-regulated, as Dave Big Booty for call-out number 4 on the show says, well-regulated in 1789 meant well-equipped. And regulated means makes level, to make even. So it doesn't matter. And by the way, you can do the same thing with the First Amendment. In other words, if I had written the First Amendment in such a way to say, the ability to wish happy birthday to somebody on their birthday being a lovely part of society and part of the glue that holds society together, the right of the people to speak freely shall not be infringed. That doesn't mean that you only can speak freely by saying happy birthday. It just means that saying happy birthday is one of the many benefits of having freedom of speech. It's just a little ornamentation. I actually kind of wish that they hadn't put it there because these people are idiots and who can't read. But it is to keep and bear arms. Keep them, own them. That's what a militia is. And again, just go back to the party hat thing. The ability to wish happy birthday to your children is being an important part of being a functioning adult. The right to free speech shall not be impinged. That does not mean that you only have the right to say happy birthday. It just means it's one of the benefits of having the freedom to say happy birthday. And if they'd wanted it to say, you shall have the right to say happy birthday without intrusion by the government, but the government can monitor everything else that you say and do, then that would have been clear too. But that's not what they do, so it's not what they do. Idiots. And the last question on 4-part, magnificent, gigantic, probably 10-hour fiesta of philosophy comes from our friend Max Wild. Max, good to see you. Why don't you people want women to choose what they can do with their own bodies? We kind of covered that earlier. I'm not going to go over it again. When you hear that argument, you say, well, we're not talking about what they can do with their own bodies. What they can do with their own bodies is entirely their business. No one's saying for an instant, that women can't do what they want to do with their own bodies. We're talking about the other bodies that are inside of their bodies. That's the issue. Those are not their bodies. And when you hear people say, it's my body, it's my choice, it's not your body. It's not. It's not your DNA. It's not your genetics. You didn't put it there. If you could put it there by yourself, you wouldn't need males. There wouldn't be any males. There wouldn't be sexual reproduction. Everybody would just split off by budding like amoebas do. And in that case, then you could do whatever you damn well want to. But you didn't make it on your own. You knew how it was made. Somebody is equally responsible for it. I know this is just absolute heresy in the era of the ascendancy of women. But that baby is half the man's. It's half his. He put half of it there. He's half responsible for it. It's true the woman is bearing it, bringing it into the world. That is a burden that women pay, and they get benefits in exchange for those burdens. That's the social contract between the sexes. They have an obligation and a burden to bear the children and raise them, and in exchange for that, they are given a wide variety of benefits from the males who don't have that burden. You can start dicking around with that and poking holes in it if you want to, but nevertheless, that's the deal. And if it turns out, I'm not going to go back into this thing, but this is one thought I've had. with this modern feminist idea that the definition of a modern woman is somebody who's willing to abort their own children. And if you're not willing to abort your own children, then you're not really female. Let me just say this. When we talk about the benefits provided to women in exchange for bearing children, a lot of feminists will say things like, okay, so nobody gets my door when I get out of the car, or maybe he doesn't, get the chair for me when I go to a restaurant or whatever. I don't need that. Nobody helps me get my bag into the overhead compartment. I don't care. I can live without that. The small price to pay for my freedom to have as many abortions as I want. It's a little deeper than that. If you exclude the privileges that are provided to childbearing half of the human race by the non-childbearing half, then you start getting into things like it's men in the lifeboats first. First. What do you mean first? Well, ma'am, Miss Progressive Feminist, if the Titanic is going down and we destroy this relationship that we have, where we men are willing to say we will die voluntarily to preserve you, and the reason we're going to die to preserve you is because you preserve the species. This is why we're doing it. Women and children first into the lifeboats. I will give up my one and only life in exchange for protecting the women. You can mess with that contract, and you're doing your very best to do it. If that's the case, it won't be... See, this is the thing that they don't get. This is the thing that these feminists don't get, is that if the Titanic goes down and they get their way, it won't be women and children first. But it won't be women and men equally either. It won't be like, well, we'll just one by one go into the lifeboats. Because if this contract is destroyed and the Titanic goes down, every single person in those lifeboats will be male. Every single one of them will be male. Every one of them. Because they're stronger than the women. And if we destroy this entire contract that we have between the sexes, which is their intention, then it's not like they're going to get half the seats on the lifeboats. They're going to go from having all the seats on the lifeboats to having none of the seats on the lifeboats. Because if this goes away, then it will just be a question of who's stronger. Who is physically stronger? We know the answer to this. They may not want to admit it, but we know it's true. So that's your Titanic 2112, right? The boat strikes an iceberg. It's your body? Okay, knock yourself out. Fantastic. Help me aboard. Help yourself aboard. Wait a minute, what are you doing? I'm throwing you overboard. How dare you? What do you mean, how dare I? I can, can't I? I'm stronger than you, aren't I? Maybe I'll just punch you in the nose or punch you in the face, knock you unconscious, pitch you overboard. Now I'm in the lifeboat. You're in the water freezing to death. So think it through, ladies, because it's not as obvious or as superficial as you think. It's much deeper. It's much, 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 much deeper than that. Much deeper. And there are a lot of single moms out there who are working very hard and trying to do both those jobs. And I have more sympathy for them than anybody else in this society. I really do. I have more sympathy for single moms who have to go out in the world and deal with all the stress of work and everything, and then have to come home and raise a family by themselves. It's terribly, terribly difficult. It's true for single dads, too. There's just not as many of them. But when you start tampering with this, you are messing with the fundamental glue of civilization. Because if men are not giving up their seats to women in lifeboats when the ship is going down, then it's game over as far as everything that I think that life is worthwhile is about. Then it genuinely becomes the kind of living hell that feminists should fear more than anything. If you do away with this contract, you no longer have good men giving their lives to protect women from bad men. It's all just brute force. And these women will lose in every one of these battles. Not just physical brute force either. It's psychological brute force. We're not these guys wouldn't be using their fists. I mean, if you have the Titanic in year 2112 after this thing is done, they're the ones who are going to be armed with knives and guns and be perfectly willing to use them against these poor, innocent, defenseless people. They're going to shoot them in the head and pitch them into the ocean. That's where the world goes. That's where the world goes if you start messing around with this. I wouldn't do it. And as Glenn writes about all the time, women look, just so we're crystal clear, I've said it before earlier tonight, and I'll say it again. Anybody who doesn't think that women should have full legal protection, full exact same salary if they're doing the exact same job for the exact same hours, and absolute equality under the law, that person's a Philistine. They're subhuman. There's something wrong with them. They have serious psychological issues. Of course they should be treated as equals. But this kind of thing is a different sort of thing. It's not law. This is deeper than law. It's deeper than all that other stuff. And that's why so many feminists are so fantastically unhappy, and why so many conservative women seem to be happier, because there is possible to strike the best of both worlds arrangement, where men do things like get the door and get, and get out of the lifeboat and make way for you and the kids to get in the lifeboat, and still treat you like human beings, and you have full law and legal protections. You have full abilities to do whatever you want to in life, have your entire careers ahead of you, achieve whatever you want to. That world exists. It exists right now. But as always, the reason we're conservatives is because people want to go too far, right? You get to a point where everything's awesome, and then they just want to keep going. And then it gets less awesome, and that's where I get off the boat. That's where I stop. That's where I start conserving the awesomeness. And at 2 hours, 38 minutes and 54 seconds into episode 3, we are finished with the Tough Liberal Questions edition of the Stratosphere Lounge, the most epic piece of blathering nonsense and jaw flapping I think I've ever experienced personally.